Hey guys, tonight we're diving deep into the heart of Earth's ancient past, all the way back to a time when the world was vastly different, a time when everything you know about continents, oceans, and climates was nothing but a distant future. Imagine a world where there was no Atlantic Ocean, no Pacific, just one massive landmass stretching across the globe. This supercontinent was called Pangea, and it's the world we're going to explore together tonight. Picture yourself standing on the edge of Pangea's coastline, looking out at the endless expanse of land stretching all the way to the horizon. There's no dividing ocean, no break between the continents, just one colossal landmass. The air is thick with moisture, the atmosphere rich with the earthy smell of dense, untouched forests. The temperature is warm, the sun blazing overhead in a way that seems almost too intense. This was a world of extremes, and not just in terms of climate. This was a world where the Earth, ESA geography, was on the verge of its greatest transformation, where continental shifts were slowly altering the very fabric of the planet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how far our journey reaches tonight. I'm always curious where in the world you guys are listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Now, let's picture Pangea in all its glory. It's roughly 300 million years ago, and Earth is a completely different place. All of the continents that you know, the Americas, Europe, Africa, Asia, are slowly but steadily merging into one giant supercontinent. The forces that drive continental drift, tectonic shifts, and geological pressures are at work beneath the surface. This isn't just some fleeting phase in Earth's history. This is a moment that will leave a profound mark on the planet, shaping everything that follows. The land stretches so far and wide that it's almost impossible to imagine the distances. Pangea, as a landmass, covers almost 25% of Earth's surface, and its boundaries reach deep into the equator and the poles alike. The thing is, this was not just a big landmass. This was an ecosystem that functioned in ways we can fully grasp. There were no oceans to divide ecosystems. Creatures, whether on land or in the shallow waters that dotted this landmass, could travel vast distances, crossing into territories that, today, would seem impossible to link. Imagine walking from what is now North America to what is now Europe, crossing regions with familiar yet strange landscapes. The land, like the creatures it supported, was interconnected. No barriers, no oceans to separate groups from each other. In this world, the land itself was a constant force of change. You could almost feel the ground shifting under your feet, the mountains rising, the valleys opening up as tectonic plates slowly but surely pushed together and pulled apart. Volcanoes were more frequent, spewing ash and lava into the atmosphere, altering the climate, giving rise to storms that brought moisture to vast swathes of land. The climate was dramatically different from what we know today, but it had its own rhythm, a pulse that guided life's evolution on Pangea. Now, let's talk about the climate. Unlike today, when Earth has an intricate balance between deserts, forests, and polar ice caps, Pangea's climate was incredibly harsh and inconsistent. The center of the supercontinent was a massive desert, hot and arid. while the coastal regions were far more hospitable. But the real kicker, due to the sheer size of Pangea, the landmass didn't have the moderating effect of oceans. So, while coastal areas experienced a relatively temperate climate, the interior of Pangea became subject to extreme weather, intense heat during the day, bitter cold at night, and very little rainfall, especially in the interior. Yet, despite these extremes, life flourished. But it was a different kind of life. Pangea was home to a variety of ancient creatures, many of which look completely foreign to us today. Imagine standing in an ancient forest, the air thick with humidity, and the ground soft beneath your feet. Massive ferns tower above you, and strange, gigantic reptiles lumber through the underbrush. This is the world of early dinosaurs, amphibians, and other prehistoric creatures. The first true dinosaurs were already emerging at this time, though they were quite small compared to their later, more monstrous relatives. But this world wasn't just home to reptiles. It also supported vast, teeming swamps, which gave rise to amphibians, some of them monstrous in size. Imagine the first amphibians crawling from the water, their limbs awkwardly adapting to life on land. The creatures of Pangea were diverse, but they were also testing the limits of the environment, evolving in ways that we can only begin to understand. As you move through the landscape, you begin to notice a pattern. The entire Earth, despite its vastness and apparent uniformity, was divided into ecosystems, but they were connected, not isolated. This was the beginning of what would later become the complex and diverse ecological systems that we recognize today. What was happening on Pangea was a prelude to the great environmental shifts that would later shape the Earth's biosphere. Pangea, in all its grandeur, was a stage set for evolution on an epic scale, where life would rise to fill every niche, from the first dinosaurs to the largest amphibians, and everything in between. The world was on the brink of one of its most significant evolutionary events, and the stage was set for the great biodiversity that would come later. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a vast prehistoric desert, the interior of Pangea stretching out before you in an expanse of arid terrain. The air is thick with heat, and the ground beneath your feet cracks with dryness, the remnants of long-lost rivers that once carved their way across this land. The sun beats down mercilessly, casting long shadows across the sand dunes, and you can hear the occasional distant rustle of wind sweeping through the barren landscape. But as you look around, you realize that this desert is not empty. It's filled with life, life that has adapted to this harsh, unforgiving environment. This, my friend, is a glimpse of Pangea's extreme interior, where the climate was intense and volatile. Unlike the lush coastlines, where forests flourished and life thrived in humid, temperate conditions, the interior of Pangea was a different story. As the supercontinent slowly began to solidify into place, the landmass grew so vast that it essentially became a world unto itself. The oceans, which today moderate the climates of the continents, were far too distant to have much effect on the heart of Pangea. The result? A land of extremes. The climate in Pangea's interior wasn't the dry, hot desert we imagine today in places like the Sahara. It was even more extreme. The interior of Pangea faced tremendous temperature fluctuations, with scorching heat during the day and freezing cold at night. Without the oceans to regulate temperatures, this vast expanse of land became a brutal place to live. But life didn't just survive, it adapted. In these extreme conditions, plants and animals had to be incredibly resilient to survive. Imagine towering, thick forests of ferns and other ancient plants that were able to endure the stifling heat. These were not the lush rainforests of today, but far more rugged and hardy ecosystems, where plant life had evolved to withstand the heat and lack of rainfall. The forests were thick and dense, providing shelter and food for the growing reptilian population. But let's move on from the heat and imagine the precipitation patterns. While Pangea's coasts may have enjoyed more temperate and somewhat predictable weather, the interior was prone to fierce storms, strong winds, sandstorms, and unpredictable rainfall that could quickly shift the landscape. These storms were dramatic, reshaping the desert and making the harsh environment even more challenging for life. And yet, despite all this, life was thriving. Massive conifers and ferns towered in these ancient forests, dwarfing anything we see today. These plants, tough as nails, had to endure extreme conditions. In fact, many of them could survive the scorching heat by adapting their roots to reach water deep below the surface or by storing moisture in their stems. While the trees and plants of today have evolved to be more resilient to temperature changes, back then, Pangea's plants were pioneers, creating the conditions for the animals that would follow. Speaking of animals, this is where things get interesting. Pangea was not only home to the first true dinosaurs, but also to the bizarre, otherworldly creatures that we now know as the ancient amphibians. These creatures were huge, much larger than the amphibians we're familiar with today. Imagine the largest amphibian you can picture, but multiply its size by 10. These creatures, with their damp, slick skin and sprawling limbs, were able to thrive in the wet, swampy regions of Pangea that were scattered in between the desert. The amphibians of Pangea are a far cry from the small, timid frogs we think of today. Some of these ancient amphibians, like the temnospondyls, were the size of modern-day crocodiles, moving through the shallow waters with ease. Their adaptations allowed them to live both in water and on land, bridging the gap between the two worlds. Picture one of these giant amphibians crawling out of the water, its massive body dragging across the hot desert floor in search of food. It was an era when everything seemed a little larger, a little more dangerous. Now, let's shift focus from the interior to the coasts of Pangea, where the landscape was far more lush and hospitable. Along the coastlines, the temperature remained more stable, with humid rainforests and rich, fertile soils, giving life to an entirely different set of creatures. These coastal regions were teeming with life, from early reptiles that were starting to adapt to land, to the vast swamps that supported massive insects. It was here, in the fertile soils and sheltered coastlines, that some of the first dinosaurs began to take their first steps. But even in these more temperate environments, Pangea's climate still had its ups and downs. The early stages of the Mesozoic era, in which Pangea existed, were marked by volcanic activity that continually released gases into the atmosphere. These volcanic eruptions, though part of the natural cycle of Earth's geological activity, had a significant impact on the planet's climate. They contributed to the warming of the atmosphere, further increasing the temperatures and making it even harder for life to adapt in some areas. Yet life adapted. In fact, Pangea saw the rise of some of the earliest known life forms that would eventually evolve into the creatures we recognize today. Pangea's climate, as harsh as it was, wasn't just the result of natural cycles. It was also a product of the supercontinent's unique position on the planet. By being a single, massive landmass, Pangea had a profound impact on the Earth's ocean currents, which would have been drastically different than they are today. The land masses and their position altered the way ocean currents flowed, changing the distribution of heat and moisture around the globe. This altered the way weather patterns worked, which created an environment where extreme weather events were a regular occurrence. It's not just that the land was massive, it's that the land and the sea were in a state of flux, causing dramatic shifts in the way weather affected the planet. All of this, the scorching heat, the unpredictable rainfall, the shifting climates, the volcanic eruptions, meant that life on Pangea had to be incredibly adaptable. Those creatures that survived learned how to weather the storms, how to adapt to the changing conditions of their world. These were creatures that had to evolve quickly, learning to exploit new niches and find ways to survive in an ever-changing world. The world of Pangea was as much a world of transformation as it was a world of survival, with every day presenting new challenges for the creatures that inhabited it. And as the Earth continued to evolve, so did Pangea. The gradual but persistent movements of tectonic plates would eventually break this supercontinent apart, creating the distinct continents we recognize today. But before that happened, before Pangea began to split, the landmass was one of the most dynamic, exciting places on Earth, constantly shifting, constantly changing, and constantly giving rise to new life forms. Now, as you imagine yourself strolling along the edge of Pangea's vast ocean, you begin to realize that the waters surrounding this supercontinent were not like the ones we're familiar with today. There was no Atlantic Ocean dividing the Americas from Europe and Africa, no Pacific to separate Asia from the Americas. Instead, there was one massive ocean that covered most of Pangea's perimeter, a vast expanse of water teeming with life that was both alien and incredible. As you stand on the shoreline, the air thick with salt and humidity, the waves crashing against the land feel like they were part of a different time, one where the coastlines were far different than today. This ocean, which scientists have named Panthalassa, was the single massive body of water that encircled the supercontinent. It was deep, vast, and ancient, with different currents and ecosystems than what we know now. Imagine it stretching out farther than any modern sea, its vastness stretching as far as the eye could see. Panthalassa wasn't just a watery expanse. It was a dynamic world teeming with its own unique set of creatures. The ocean was not merely a barrier between land masses. It was a source of life, a place where prehistoric marine creatures flourished. These creatures were different from the ones that would later dominate the oceans. The seas around Pangea were home to strange and often terrifying creatures, like the giant ammonites and the large predatory fish known as the plaxoderms. Their sleek, armored bodies cut through the water with deadly precision, a reminder that the ancient seas were just as fierce as the land they bordered. But Panthalassa wasn't the only body of water shaping life during the Pangea era. The shallow seas that filled the gaps between the continents were just as important for the development of life. In fact, these shallow seas were some of the richest and most biodiverse places on Earth. Just picture yourself standing in the shallows of one of these seas, feeling the soft pull of the tide, and watching as small, shelled creatures scurry across the sandy bottom. It's hard to imagine now, but these seas were filled with strange, ancient life forms, ancestors of the modern fish and marine creatures that would come much later. Yet, the seas were not without their challenges. The ancient oceans of Pangea were subject to the same extreme fluctuations as the land. The shallow seas, though abundant with life, were also prone to rapid changes in temperature, salinity, and oxygen levels. This created an environment where life had to evolve quickly to survive. The creatures that lived in these seas developed unique adaptations to cope with the ever-changing conditions. Some evolved tough, armored exteriors to protect themselves from predators, while others developed faster swimming abilities to escape danger. While the coastal regions of Pangea were rich in life, the deeper parts of Panthalassa were a different story. These deep, dark waters were home to creatures that could withstand the crushing pressures of the ocean floor. Some of these ancient marine creatures evolved to hunt in the depths, where sunlight barely reached, and the waters were icy cold. The deep waters were also home to the massive marine reptiles that would later dominate the seas. These creatures were unlike anything we know today. Giant ichthyosaurs, pliosaurs, and plesiosaurs, their long bodies cutting through the water like living torpedoes, ruling the seas with an almost unchallenged dominance. But it wasn't just the aquatic life that benefited from the vast ocean. The movements of the ocean currents played a crucial role in shaping the climate of Pangea. With no dividing oceans between continents, Panthalassa's currents could circulate freely, shaping the weather and ensuring that the coastal regions remained more temperate. The ocean currents were like a natural conveyor belt, moving heat and moisture around the planet. These currents helped moderate temperatures in the coastal regions of Pangea, preventing the extreme heat and cold that plagued the interior. Yet, despite these moderating effects, the world of Pangea wasn't immune to climate extremes. Panthalassa, while vital for regulating temperature, also played a role in the unpredictable weather that marked the supercontinent. Just as the land was shifting and changing, so too were the oceans. Volcanic activity, oceanic currents, and the changing positions of the landmasses all contributed to the climatic instability. It was a world of unpredictability, where the seas were as wild and untamed as the land itself. While the coastal regions may have benefited from the moderating effects of the ocean, the interior of Pangea still faced extreme, life-threatening conditions, with unpredictable rainfall and scorching temperatures. As you walk along the shores, you can feel the rhythmic pulse of Panthalassa's tides, the lifeblood of this ancient world. The sound of the waves crashing against the coast is almost hypnotic, as if the ocean itself is whispering the secrets of Earth's past. And in those moments, you realize something profound. The ocean, like the land, is a world in constant flux, forever changing, forever shaping life. Panthalassa wasn't just a backdrop for Pangea, it was a driving force in the development of life on Earth, providing the nutrients, the environments, and the challenges that shaped the creatures of Pangea's seas. But the ocean was not without its dangers. Just as the land was home to fierce predators, The seas were filled with their own monsters, giant predators that lurked beneath the surface, waiting for their prey to come into range. These ancient creatures were the first of their kind, and they set the stage for the later dominance of marine reptiles. Some of these predators were the size of modern-day whales, while others were smaller, but no less deadly. As the waves crash against the shore and you watch the ocean stretch endlessly before you, it's hard to imagine how different the world was back then. Pangea's ocean was not a calm, peaceful body of water. It was a world of turmoil and transformation, where life had to adapt, evolve, and fight for survival in ways that were both beautiful and terrifying. The vast ocean that surrounded Pangea was both a cradle for life and a battleground, shaping the evolution of marine life for millions of years to come. The wind stirs gently, and as you stand at the edge of Pangea's coast, looking out over the vast, interconnected oceans, you can almost hear the whisper of ancient life, the deep, echoing call of the prehistoric creatures that roamed this supercontinent. The land was home to vast deserts, lush forests, and sprawling swamps, but it was also teeming with life that you wouldn't expect, considering the extreme conditions of the time. Let us step away from the coastal regions and move toward the more mysterious parts of Pangea, the swamps and the wetlands. These areas, far from the harsh deserts and the unrelenting heat of the interior, offered a different kind of life, one that existed in strange harmony with the forces of nature. Picture yourself standing in a humid swamp, thick with towering ferns and the low croaks of ancient amphibians. These weren't the small green frogs you're familiar with today. No, these amphibians were giants, their lumbering bodies moving through the muddy waters as if they ruled this environment. The atmosphere is heavy, the air thick with moisture, as these swamp-dwelling creatures search for food in the murky depths. This was a time when amphibians were not the timid, small creatures we know today, but were instead massive, powerful predators, towering over the landscape in search of their next meal. The swamps of Pangea were filled with ancient reptiles and amphibians of all sizes, many of them completely alien to the creatures of today. The temperature was warm and the humidity high, making it an ideal environment for reptiles and amphibians to thrive. However, they weren't alone. The wetlands were also home to an ancient group of creatures, the archosaurs. These reptiles, the distant ancestors of modern crocodiles and dinosaurs, were slowly beginning to rise to dominance on Pangea. As you venture deeper into the swamp, you can almost imagine one of these massive archosaurs, its rough, scaly skin blending into the murky waters, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its prey. It's easy to picture the world as it was, then a time when the ancestors of dinosaurs were just starting to take hold, preparing for the explosive growth that would eventually give birth to the mighty beasts that would rule Pangea for millions of years. But this wasn't a simple world of reptilian dominance. The amphibians that lived in Pangea were not just passive creatures. They were large, and many of them were fierce predators in their own right. Imagine a giant amphibian, its thick, muscular body moving swiftly through the water, its eyes keenly focused on the movements around it. This was a world where predators ruled the land and water, and every step could lead to a battle for survival. Now, think about the climate of Pangea as you move through the swamp. Unlike the extreme heat of the interior or the cooling coastal breezes, the swamps were warmer and wetter, creating an environment that was rich in life. Yet, despite the relatively stable climate of the wetlands, there were still threats from the outside world. Extreme weather events, volcanic eruptions, and other natural disasters that would periodically shake the balance of life. Even though the coastlines and swamps were home to many of Pangea's early dinosaurs and amphibians, the true dominance of the land was still yet to come. The world of Pangea was evolving, and in these swamps, you could witness the first stirrings of what would become a great age of reptilian evolution. The ancient amphibians were on the cusp of being overshadowed by creatures that would dominate not only the swamps and forests of Pangea, but the world itself, the dinosaurs. As you leave the swamps behind and look toward the forests, the landscape begins to change once again. In the shadow of Pangea's towering trees, you begin to notice that the air feels different. The temperature is cooler, more humid, and the undergrowth is dense with ferns and giant trees. Pangea's forests were home to some of the earliest examples of tree-dwelling creatures, and as you walk through the thick underbrush, you can almost feel the weight of time pressing down on you. These forests, teeming with life, were some of the first true forests to emerge on Earth, laying the foundation for the ecosystems we know today. In these ancient forests, early dinosaurs and reptiles began to evolve into new, more specialized forms, adapting to the dense vegetation and the rich variety of food sources. The trees of Pangea's forests were unlike those of today. Huge, towering trunks supported dense canopies that formed an almost impenetrable ceiling of foliage. It's in these forests that the first small dinosaurs, like the bipedal Coelophysis, began to make their mark. These creatures, small by later standards, were quick and agile, moving through the forest with incredible speed as they hunted for insects, small reptiles, and other prey. But it wasn't just dinosaurs that thrived in these forests. The canopy was home to a variety of flying reptiles, including early pterosaurs, whose wings flapped silently through the humid air. These winged creatures were the ancestors of the great flying reptiles that would eventually soar across the skies of Pangea, hunting from above and playing a vital role in the delicate balance of the ecosystem. As the forests of Pangea flourished, the early dinosaurs adapted to the variety of environments that the supercontinent offered. Some dinosaurs evolved into massive herbivores, their huge bodies moving slowly through the dense forests, while others became predators, agile and deadly, stalking their prey in the shadows. These early dinosaurs were laying the foundation for the great dinosaur era that would soon take over the entire planet. While Pangea's landscape was filled with life, it was also a world of competition and survival. The creatures that thrived in the dense forests were constantly battling not only the forces of nature, but also one another. Competition for food, territory, and mates shaped the way these early dinosaurs and reptiles evolved, giving rise to new species that would eventually dominate Pangea's vast and varied ecosystems. The forests of Pangea were more than just habitats for early life. They were the stage for some of the most dramatic changes in Earth's history. The life that lived here would eventually give way to the incredible explosion of dinosaur diversity that marked the Triassic period. But the seeds for that explosion were sown in the dense, humid forests where the first dinosaurs and flying reptiles spread their wings. As you continue your journey through the vast world of Pangea, you are now standing on the edge of what can only be described as a primordial forest, a dense, humid expanse where the underbrush seems to pulse with life. The air feels thick and moist, and every step you take sends ripples through the tall ferns and grasses that stretch as far as the eye can see. The sunlight filters weakly through the towering trees, casting a soft glow over the lush greenery. The temperature is warm, and there's a constant hum in the air, the sound of life that never seems to stop. This is the world where the first true dinosaurs are making their mark, and where the future of Earth's fauna will take shape. Imagine stepping deeper into this forest. The trees are enormous, some with trunks so thick they could take hours to walk around, their roots spreading out like thick tendrils beneath your feet. These aren't the familiar deciduous trees we know today, but ancient conifers and ferns that have been evolving for hundreds of millions of years. The forest floor is thick with plant life, mosses, ferns, and small shrubs that blanket the ground, and among them, the first large herbivorous dinosaurs are moving, grazing on the lush vegetation and growing to sizes that seem almost impossible. But these creatures aren't Urtutu, just the future rulers of the land. They are part of an evolving ecosystem that is just beginning to find its footing. As you wander through this ancient, prehistoric landscape, you realize that this world is still very much in the process of evolving, while the dinosaurs that would later dominate the Earth are beginning to emerge. They're far from the giant, fearsome creatures we picture today. The first dinosaurs were small, nimble creatures, like the bipedal Coelophyses, running through the underbrush, hunting for smaller prey, and living in the shadow of the more ancient reptiles. These small dinosaurs were still finding their niche in a world dominated by giant amphibians and early reptiles, like the Rhamphorhynchus, an early flying reptile which soared above the forest canopy with ease. The transition from the amphibians and reptiles of the early Earth to the rise of the dinosaurs didn't happen overnight. It was a slow and steady process, with creatures evolving to fit into new roles within the ecosystem. The early dinosaurs, like the Coelophysis, were just the tip of the iceberg. These creatures would eventually grow larger, becoming some of the most powerful predators to ever walk the earth. But it wasn't just the predators that were evolving. Herbivores were growing just as rapidly. The early plant-eating dinosaurs were finding new sources of food, and their adaptations were shaping the future of life on Pangea. Now, let's turn our attention to the swamps and riverbanks of Pangea. These areas, once lush and fertile, were teeming with life, and they supported some of the largest creatures on Earth. The rivers were wide, stretching across the land like veins of life, providing water to the lush plants and animals of Pangea. The swamps, too, were filled with large amphibians and reptiles, which thrived in the warm, moist environment. These creatures would have to adapt quickly, evolving both on land and in the water to take advantage of every opportunity. Giant amphibians, like Ariops, were making their mark on the ecosystem, using their powerful limbs to move through the water with ease. The creatures of the swamps weren't just confined to the water. Many amphibians and reptiles began to move onto the land, evolving into the first true land-dwelling animals. These creatures, like Dimetrodon and other early synapsids, were slowly transitioning from aquatic life to a more terrestrial existence. This transition would eventually give rise to the mammals, which would one day dominate the planet. But for now, the world of Pangea was still a world of reptiles and amphibians. all vying for their place in the ecosystem. The climate, too, was playing a role in shaping life during this period. While the coastal regions of Pangea enjoyed more temperate conditions, the interior of the supercontinent was a land of extremes. The deserts and barren landscapes were subjected to extreme heat during the day, followed by freezing cold temperatures at night. The fluctuations in temperature and the lack of rainfall made survival a constant challenge for those creatures living in the interior. But life always finds a way to adapt, and the creatures of Pangea, from the smallest amphibian to the largest dinosaur, were evolving to cope with the harsh conditions. In fact, the landmass of Pangea itself was a dynamic force, constantly shifting and changing as the tectonic plates moved beneath the surface. Volcanic activity was frequent, spewing ash and gases into the atmosphere, contributing to the unpredictable climate that marked this era. The active tectonic activity beneath the supercontinent was responsible for the formation of mountain ranges, deep valleys, and vast basins. The Earth's crust was in constant motion, and the shifting land masses would eventually give birth to the continents we recognize today. But the dramatic forces of nature weren't just about the land shifting and moving. The very atmosphere of Pangea was undergoing significant changes as well. During the time of Pangea, Earth's atmosphere was rich in carbon dioxide, which contributed to the high temperatures that were characteristic of the supercontinent. The increased volcanic activity contributed to the greenhouse effect, trapping heat in the atmosphere and creating a warm, tropical environment. This warmer climate allowed lush forests to spread across much of Pangea, providing a wealth of resources for plant-eating dinosaurs and herbivores. At the same time, the warming atmosphere created by the volcanic activity had consequences for the ecosystem. The changing temperatures and carbon dioxide levels were affecting the weather patterns, contributing to the extreme seasonal variations that marked Pangea. These dramatic shifts in climate would have a lasting impact on the creatures of the supercontinent, shaping the evolutionary path that they would follow for millions of years. Despite the harsh conditions, Pangea's ecosystems were flourishing with life. The changing atmosphere, the shifting land masses, and the evolving species all played a role in creating a world that was full of diversity, with creatures of all shapes and sizes adapting to the ever-changing environment. From the swamps and forests to the deserts and volcanic regions, Pangea was a place of constant transformation, where life was evolving in real time. As you stand in the midst of this ever-changing world, you can feel the pulse of life all around you. The air is thick with humidity, the sound of distant thunder in the sky as storms begin to build. The ground beneath your feet shifts slightly as the earth moves, a constant reminder that even the land itself is in flux. Life, from the smallest amphibians to the largest dinosaurs, is adapting, changing, and evolving. It's a world of transformation, one that is constantly in motion, constantly reshaping itself, and it's only a matter of time before the supercontinent of Pangea begins to break apart, setting the stage for the next chapter in Earth's long history. Now, imagine the land slowly shifting beneath your feet, the Earth itself giving way to a transformation that will eventually reshape the planet. Pangea, as mighty as it was, couldn't last forever. The forces beneath the surface, which had been quietly moving for millions of years, were starting to exert themselves. The tectonic plates that made up the supercontinent were slowly but surely shifting, and the process of continental drift, the very same process that would eventually split Pangea apart, was underway. As you stand in the middle of this vast, ancient world, you can feel the weight of the Earth's changing forces all around you. The ground trembles slightly. The trees sway as if they, too, sense the coming shift. The climate, which had been relatively stable up until now, is beginning to change once more, as the very land you're standing on begins to break apart. Imagine the massive rumbles of earthquakes as the land splits, valleys form, and oceans begin to carve their way through the once solid landmass. In the far distance, you can hear the deep groans of the earth as the supercontinent begins to break apart at the seams, slowly but inexorably. This event, which we now know as the beginning of the breakup of Pangea, set the stage for a series of geological events that would have a profound impact on the evolution of life. As Pangea split into separate landmasses, it created isolated ecosystems. Each continent began to evolve independently, fostering a new wave of diversity. But the process of breaking up Pangea was no simple or gentle one. It took millions of years, and during that time, life on Earth was thrown into chaos. The oceans, which had previously been connected around Pangea, began to divide and form new seas and waterways. This created new coastlines, new marine environments, and new opportunities for life to diversify. As the continents drifted apart, they also began to experience different climates. The once unified climate of Pangea, where temperatures were relatively warm across the board, began to splinter into more localized climates, which created new evolutionary pressures on the creatures that lived there. You can almost feel the tension in the air as the land rips and tears, creating vast rift valleys and new coastlines. The animals, plants, and ecosystems that had once been part of a unified whole are now isolated from each other. Species that had once roamed freely across Pangea's landmass were now facing new challenges, adapting to the changing geography and climates, and evolving into completely new forms. The process of continental drift wasn't just splitting the land. It was setting the stage for some of the greatest evolutionary changes in Earth's history. Picture the creatures of Pangea, those early dinosaurs and reptiles, now being separated by oceans, mountains, and valleys. The world is changing at a pace they've never experienced before. For the creatures that once roamed freely across this supercontinent, life was about to become more challenging, more isolated, and more competitive. The evolutionary pressures on these creatures became more intense as they were forced to adapt to their new, fragmented environments. It was in these isolated pockets of land that species began to evolve in ways that were unique to each new environment. The oceans, too, began to change dramatically. As the land masses moved apart, they created new ocean currents and new marine environments. The once unified body of water, Panthalassa, began to fragment into smaller oceans and seas, each with its own ecosystems. And with this change came the rise of new marine life. Marine reptiles, ammonites, and early fish species that adapted to the shifting waters. The once thriving coastal swamps of Pangea, which had been home to amphibians and early reptiles, were now transformed into new, isolated habitats. Creatures that once shared a common ancestor began to develop along separate evolutionary paths, creating an entirely new set of species. But it wasn't just the oceans that were transforming. As Pangea split, It created vast mountain ranges and high plateaus that cut through the once flat landscape. Imagine standing on the edge of one of these towering peaks, looking down on the world below. As the rift between the continents widens, the mountains form natural barriers, creating new environmental challenges and isolating species that once shared a common home. The climate, too, began to change as the continents drifted toward their new positions. The interior of the landmasses became drier, while the coastlines experienced more temperate climates. This was a world in flux, one where every creature, from the giant dinosaurs to the smallest amphibians, was forced to adapt or perish. And yet, despite the upheaval, life persisted. The creatures of Pangea may have been scattered and isolated, but they were also resilient. The land itself, once unified, was now a place of transformation and rebirth. The split of Pangea would eventually give rise to the modern continents, but it would also give rise to the vast diversity of life we see today. The breakup of Pangea, though slow, was an event of monumental importance. It didn't just change the geography of Earth, it changed the very course of evolution. The world was no longer a single, unified landmass. Instead, it was a patchwork of continents and oceans, each with its own distinct climates and ecosystems. And as the continents drifted farther apart, the creatures that inhabited them were faced with the challenge of adapting to their new, isolated environments. It was in this time of upheaval and isolation that many of the greatest evolutionary advances were made, laying the foundation for the world as we know it. As you watch the land masses move, as the oceans carve new coastlines, and the mountains rise from the earth, you realize that this was only the beginning. The breakup of Pangea set in motion a series of events that would shape the future of life on Earth. The creatures that survived this dramatic transformation would go on to evolve into the diverse array of species we recognize today, from the mighty dinosaurs to the mammals that would eventually rise to dominance. And as the Earth continued to shift and change, life, ever adaptive, continued to evolve. As the slow rift of Pangea continues, you find yourself standing at the edge of a world teetering on the brink of a new era. The massive supercontinent, once a single, unified landmass, is now a fragmented collection of drifting continents. This monumental shift is reshaping not only the geography of Earth, but also the very fabric of life that inhabits it. The world you once knew is breaking apart, piece by piece, creating entirely new environments and opportunities for life to adapt. Imagine yourself standing at the shoreline, watching as the sea slowly fills the gap between the two continents now diverging from one another. The vast ocean of Panthalassa that once connected everything is giving way to new seas and gulfs. The land beneath your feet trembles slightly, as if Earth itself is breathing in and out, expanding and contracting with each seismic shift. The split between the continents is vast. Some distances are so great that the isolated landmasses will evolve completely on their own. The separation of Pangea is a slow, gradual process, but each movement brings with it massive changes to the Earth's landscapes and ecosystems. This is the beginning of a new world. The animals that once roamed across the supercontinent are now being isolated, forced to adapt to different environments that will shape their evolution in unexpected ways. Species that once interacted with each other are now forced into competition for resources, some thriving in their new isolated environments, others struggling to survive. The process of speciation begins to take shape as creatures evolve to meet the challenges of their new surroundings. In the once unified tropical expanse of Pangea, the temperature starts to shift. The interior of the landmass, which was once an endless expanse of humid, tropical forests, becomes drier as the continents begin to drift toward new latitudes. The climate changes dramatically. Regions that were once lush and green are now becoming arid deserts, while areas that were once warm are now cooling, their ecosystems shifting toward more temperate conditions. The ocean currents, once a steady force, are also changing with the breakup of Pangea, further altering the climate and creating new coastal habitats that will support a different kind of life. As the continents drift apart, they not only experience new climates, but they also begin to experience more extreme geological activity. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and other tectonic forces are reshaping the land even as the continents move farther apart. In the ancient, isolated seas between these newly formed continents, new species of marine life begin to evolve. The shallow seas, which once connected the coastlines, become separate bodies of water, each with its own unique ecosystem. The first true oceanic barriers are formed, further isolating species and encouraging diversification. The breakup of Pangea also sets the stage for the rise of completely new types of ecosystems. The once continuous landmass is now divided into isolated regions, each of which develops its own distinct flora and fauna. The life forms that once lived together in close proximity are now separated by vast distances. This isolation triggers rapid evolutionary changes as species adapt to new climates, new resources, and new environmental pressures. This is where the great experiment of life on Earth truly begins. The early dinosaurs, once confined to the temperate regions of Pangea, now find themselves in new and unfamiliar environments. As the continents continue to drift apart, these creatures begin to adapt in ways never before seen. Some dinosaurs, once bound to the lush forests of Pangea's interior, find themselves in new, arid landscapes where they must learn to cope with scarcity. Others, once terrestrial creatures, begin to adapt to new environments, taking to the skies or the seas. It's during this time that the first true mammalian ancestors begin to emerge. While dinosaurs dominate the land, the small nocturnal mammals that would eventually evolve into the creatures we recognize today begin their journey. These mammals are evolving in the shadows of the dinosaurs, living in the cooler, more sheltered environments of Pangea's forests and caves. The isolation of the continents allows these mammals to evolve into new forms, preparing them for the rise of mammals that will come later in Earth's history. But it isn't just the animals that are evolving. The plants that once dominated the supercontinent are being reshaped by the changing climate and geography. As the once constant climate of Pangea breaks up into new and varied climates, the plant life begins to evolve in different directions. The dense ferns that once covered much of Pangea's land are replaced by new, more resilient species that can survive in the cooler and drier conditions that are emerging. The evolution of plants during this time is a critical part of the story of Pangea's breakup. As the land masses drift apart, new forests, grasslands, and deserts begin to emerge, providing new opportunities for life to evolve and thrive. And as the continents continue to drift apart, the oceans begin to fill in the gaps between them, creating new marine environments. This new geography brings about a dramatic shift in marine life. New species begin to evolve in the separated seas, creating the first truly isolated marine ecosystems. As the oceans grow wider, their currents change, and their ecosystems become more complex. The oceans that once connected Pangea's coastlines are now a series of isolated bodies of water, each with its own set of challenges and opportunities for the creatures that inhabit them. The dramatic breakup of Pangea, while shaping the world's geography and ecosystems, also set the stage for the next great chapter in Earth's history, the rise of the dinosaurs to dominance. The once sprawling supercontinent was breaking up, but the creatures that lived there were just beginning to adapt to their new environments. The first true dinosaur species, once confined to the temperate regions of Pangea, began to spread across the newly formed continents. Some dinosaurs became giant, fearsome predators, while others adapted to the changing environment in their own unique ways. The separation of Pangea was more than just a geological event. It was the birth of the modern world. It set the stage for the rise of mammals, the evolution of plant life, and the eventual emergence of the diverse ecosystems we know today. As the continents drifted farther apart, they created the conditions for new species to evolve and thrive, ultimately leading to the world we recognize today. The transformation of Pangea from a unified landmass to a fragmented collection of continents was one of the most significant events in the history of Earth. It set the stage for the incredible diversity of life that would come in the millions of years that followed. And as the continents continue to drift, we are reminded that Earth's history is still unfolding, a world in constant motion, creating new opportunities for life to evolve, adapt, and thrive. As you continue to witness the gradual transformation of Pangea, it becomes clear that the split of this supercontinent didn't just reshape the land. It also triggered a cascade of environmental changes that reverberated through every corner of Earth. While life on Pangea was thriving, the new isolated continents each began to develop distinct ecosystems that would lay the foundation for the future of life on Earth. These shifts would eventually give rise to the remarkable diversity of species we see today. The breakup of Pangea was a catalyst for the evolution of life, particularly for the now dominant dinosaurs, whose reign would soon begin. At this point in Earth's history, the shifting tectonic plates were causing deep fissures to open between the continents, each fracture creating new coastlines and inland seas. Imagine standing at the edge of one of these newly formed seas, water stretching endlessly before you. Yet in the distance, the land seems forever split by an impassable gulf. The oceans that once connected Pangea's vast shores were now distinct and separate, filled with their own unique marine life. The once unified, continuous coastline now spanned across disconnected regions, each with its own climate and ecosystems. One of the most significant changes brought on by Pangea's breakup was the creation of vast new marine environments. The seas, which once flowed across the single landmass of Pangea, now separated into new bodies of water, each with different conditions. As the continents pulled away, they created new ocean currents, which would have a profound effect on climate patterns and marine life. The once massive Panthalassa, now fragmented into the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, each with its own set of characteristics. The separation of these waters also caused changes in the chemical composition of the seas, altering marine habitats in dramatic ways. In these newly formed seas, marine life began to adapt to their changing environments. You might imagine the first marine reptiles, such as ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, beginning to take to the water, adapting to the separate oceans as they filled their niche in the food chain. The separation of the oceans allowed for the rapid evolution of these sea creatures. The warmer, shallow waters of the now divided seas became breeding grounds for marine life, while the deeper, colder oceanic regions remained home to other, more specialized species. On land, the same forces of isolation were at work. As the continents began to drift apart, the creatures of Pangea found themselves separated by vast stretches of ocean and land. Imagine that, for the first time, you were on a continent that was isolated. Species once roaming freely across Pangea were now confined to their own unique environments. The flora and fauna that once shared a common home were now evolving in isolation, adapting to their specific environments and climates. In these new separated ecosystems, life began to evolve in extraordinary ways. The gradual isolation led to the phenomenon we call speciation, where one species splits into different varieties, eventually becoming completely separate species. This process was particularly prominent among the dinosaurs. With the continents breaking apart, dinosaurs were able to evolve independently, developing new traits to survive the distinct climates of each region. In some areas, dinosaurs grew larger to better cope with the climate or fend off predators, while in others, smaller, quicker species adapted to more nimble environments. These evolutionary pressures gave rise to some of the most iconic creatures in Earth's history, including the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex and the massive sauropods like Brachiosaurus and Apatosaurus. At the same time, the breakup of Pangea was creating barriers that would eventually lead to the evolution of distinct groups of animals. What had once been a single unified world was now divided into isolated pockets. The dinosaurs that once shared similar ancestors were now being forced to evolve separately, leading to the diversification of species into the various groups we would recognize today. The separation was creating the perfect conditions for the rise of new species, each uniquely adapted to the land and climate it found itself in. In addition to the dinosaurs, this split also had a profound impact on other forms of life. As the continents separated, the diversity of plant life began to expand. On Pangea, the plant life was largely dominated by ferns, cycads, and conifers. But as the continents split and evolved, so too did the plants. The different climates that emerged in the isolated landmasses supported different types of vegetation. The cooler climates of the northern continents, like what we now call North America and Eurasia, saw the development of different species of conifers, while the warmer, more temperate regions supported a greater variety of flowering plants. The breakup also helped to create more defined biomes, each continent developing its own unique ecosystems. Imagine the contrast between the lush, humid rainforests of the ancient land masses and the arid deserts that began to emerge. Some continents, particularly in the southern hemisphere, were more affected by these extreme shifts, creating ecosystems that would foster the rise of unique species, especially among the reptiles and early mammals. As the continents continued to shift, They also began to form mountain ranges, deep valleys, and expansive river systems. These physical features dramatically altered the landscapes, creating new challenges for the species that lived on them. The rising mountains acted as barriers, preventing species from migrating freely, while the new rivers created corridors for some and obstacles for others. These changes were subtle, but they were happening on a grand scale, altering not only the physical geography of Earth, but the very evolution of life itself. With the splitting of Pangea, Earth was undergoing one of its greatest geological transformations, setting the stage for the next chapter in the evolutionary saga of life. The life forms that once existed as part of a single, unified ecosystem were now going through a process of separation, adaptation, and evolution that would give rise to the incredibly diverse species we see today. The age of Pangea may have come to an end, but its legacy, the life it nurtured, and the environments it shaped, lives on in the creatures that continue to adapt and thrive. The slow process of continental drift was reshaping the world, but it wasn't just the land that was changing. Earth's climate, its oceans, and its ecosystems were undergoing a transformation that would echo through time. As the continents continued to separate, life on Earth was evolving in ways never before seen. The end of Pangea marked the beginning of a new era, one that would lead to the rise of new ecosystems, new species, and ultimately, the world we recognize today. The landscape around you continues to shift, and as you move across the changing world, you begin to sense the magnitude of the transformations occurring on Earth. Pangea's breakup is far from a sudden event. Rather, it's a prolonged process, one that spans millions of years, during which continents drift further and further apart. The effects of this movement are vast, not just on the land masses themselves, but also on the living creatures that call these new, emerging continents home. You might feel the tremors beneath your feet as massive tectonic shifts continue to carve the world into distinct regions, each evolving with its own unique characteristics. Volcanoes erupt in the distance, reshaping the mountains that rise between the newly separated land masses. These eruptions release ashen gases into the atmosphere, altering the climate, making the already volatile world even more unpredictable. The air feels different now, thicker with the changing atmosphere, as Earth's natural forces play their role in shaping the future of life. As the continents continue to drift, they start to take on entirely new shapes. The once joined land of Pangea is now a world of distinct continents, each moving toward its own path. North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Each one begins to form its own identity, carrying with it a unique evolutionary history. But this transformation doesn't happen in isolation. As the continents shift, the creatures living on them must adapt to the changing environments. No longer able to travel across the once contiguous landmass, animals that once shared common ancestors are now isolated, evolving independently in the new fragmented world. This is the stage for the rise of distinct species, some of them familiar to us, others entirely alien. As the climates shift, the vegetation begins to change too. The lush forests and swamps that covered Pangea's temperate regions begin to break apart. Where tropical rainforests once stood, arid deserts and savannas start to take form. The cooling of the planet, in part due to the breakup and the increased volcanic activity, creates new pressures on the evolving species. Life that once thrived in warm, humid environments must now contend with cooler, more variable conditions. Those that can adapt, those that can survive the new climates, will be the ones that dominate in the coming eras. Let's focus for a moment on the creatures of this transformed world. Dinosaurs, which once roamed freely across Pangea, now find themselves isolated on different continents. In North America, the climate is becoming cooler, and the forests that once supported large herbivores like Stegosaurus are beginning to recede. Meanwhile, in the southern parts of the planet, continents like Gondwana, which will eventually split into South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and India, are becoming more distinct. The dinosaurs that call these regions home must evolve to adapt to the new environments. Cold-blooded creatures once used to consistent heat are now being pushed to evolve traits that help them survive changing temperatures and food sources. As the continents become more separated, the formation of seas, rivers, and mountain ranges further isolates species. A major evolutionary force at play here is the process of allopatric speciation. This is when species evolve in different directions because they were geographically separated. As the continents shift, the creatures that once roamed freely across the landmass are now forced into new ecological niches, creating a breeding ground for speciation. Dinosaurs, reptiles, and early mammals are evolving in different ways depending on the climate, geography, and the resources available to them. This is where Earth's future begins to take shape. The world that once supported the vast herds of dinosaurs and massive amphibians is now separating into distinct territories. The animals that once shared ecosystems, large theropods, early herbivores, and the mysterious, massive amphibians of the time, are now forced into their own isolated environments. On some continents, the herbivores evolve into larger, more specialized forms. The carnivores follow suit, becoming even more ferocious in their pursuit of food. The evolutionary arms race is in full swing on the isolated landmass of what will become South America. A group of herbivorous dinosaurs begins to evolve into the giant sauropods that will later dominate the planet. Meanwhile, on other continents, new species of theropods begin to develop, some evolving faster, others adapting slower to the changes. The increased geographical isolation due to the splitting continents means that life is undergoing rapid diversification. Species that would have once shared a common ancestor are now evolving along different lines. On the more temperate and coastal regions, life is beginning to flourish in different ways. The first true birds begin to emerge from their reptilian ancestors, adapting to the shifting climate and finding niches in the changing landscape. These birds, though still small, represent a massive evolutionary step, one that will eventually give rise to the flying creatures that will rule the skies for millions of years to come. In the oceans, marine reptiles like ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs are evolving at a rapid pace, adapting to the new, more fragmented seas. The separation of the oceans into distinct bodies of water forces the marine species to adapt to new environments. Some evolve to be faster, more agile swimmers. Others adapt to the colder, deeper waters where food is abundant, but the pressures are greater. The oceans are becoming more diverse, with marine life beginning to evolve in ways that were unimaginable when the continents were still one unified mass. But as the Earth continues to change, so too does the atmosphere. The breakup of Pangea releases massive amounts of gases into the atmosphere, further altering the climate. Volcanic activity continues to ramp up, pushing CO2 levels to higher concentrations. While these forces bring about significant changes, they also create opportunities for new species to evolve and thrive. As the Earth cools and warms in different cycles, life adapts, taking on new forms and new abilities to survive in increasingly diverse climates. Through all these changes, the landscape of Earth is transforming, becoming more fragmented and isolated, but also more vibrant and diverse. The seas are teeming with life, the skies are alive with the first birds, and the land is crawling with the early ancestors of creatures we recognize today. What was once a unified supercontinent is now a planet of separation, where every inch of land offers new challenges and every new ecological niche offers the possibility of life evolving in unique and exciting ways. This dramatic transformation, as painful as it might have been for some species, is the foundation upon which the world's modern ecosystems are built. The breakup of Pangea doesn't just change the world physically, it changes the course of life itself, setting the stage for the rise of the dinosaurs to their global dominance, and later, the eventual rise of mammals after the great extinctions. The drifting of Pangea was not just an event, it was the beginning of Earth's future. A future filled with biodiversity and life, evolving in all directions. As the Earth continues to transform, the movement of continents is not just geological, it's a harbinger of the seismic shifts happening in the fabric of life itself. The breakup of Pangea wasn't just the physical splitting of land masses, it set in motion evolutionary processes that would change the very course of life on Earth. And as the continents drifted apart, ecosystems started to become more specialized, resulting in the diversification of species in ways that were previously unimaginable. These separate landmasses, each evolving independently, became incubators for life, each new environment pushing the creatures living there to adapt in extraordinary ways. As you look across the now separated continents, the scene unfolding before you is unlike anything Earth has ever seen. The once unified world is now a collection of isolated landmasses, each one a new canvas for evolution to work its magic. The separation of Pangea created the perfect conditions for speciation, where species adapted and evolved in response to their new, unique environments. Each continent was now its own world, with new climates, new geography, and new challenges for life to navigate. Let's zoom in on the animals that lived during this time. Dinosaurs, those majestic reptiles that had only just begun to rise to prominence, now found themselves in isolated ecosystems. On the continent that would become Africa, herbivorous dinosaurs adapted to the dry, dusty conditions of the emerging desert landscape. Meanwhile, on the landmass that would become North America, the changing climate created the perfect conditions for a different kind of dinosaur, one with specialized hunting abilities to thrive in the temperate forests and plains. These isolated environments allowed the dinosaurs to diversify, developing into a variety of shapes and sizes, each tailored to their specific habitats. But it wasn't just the dinosaurs that were evolving. The mammals, which had been living in the shadows of the giant reptiles, were beginning to adapt as well. While dinosaurs dominated the land, mammals were slowly evolving into new forms. preparing for the time when they would rise to prominence after the dinosaurs' eventual extinction. The mammals that survived the breakup of Pangea were small nocturnal creatures that lived in the shadows of the larger, more dominant species. These mammals began to develop new traits, more complex brains, better hearing, and improved vision that would allow them to survive in the changing world. As the land masses drifted, the plants also underwent significant changes. Pangea's original forests, dominated by ferns and conifers, were being replaced by new types of vegetation as the continents settled into their new climates. The cooler regions began to develop the first true forests, populated by broad-leaved trees and the flowering plants. The once dominant cycads and ferns started to lose ground to these new types of plants, and the ecosystems of each isolated continent began to develop unique characteristics. The plants that thrived in these new environments had to adapt to new climate conditions, whether it was the harsh deserts of Africa or the cool temperate zones of North America. The oceans, too, were undergoing significant changes. With the formation of new seas between the drifting continents, marine life was now separated by vast distances. Once connected, these bodies of water now held isolated ecosystems with different species of fish, marine reptiles, and invertebrates adapting to the conditions of their new homes. These isolated marine environments would eventually give rise to new species, each uniquely adapted to the conditions of the seas surrounding the continents. But the most dramatic change came with the rise of the dinosaurs. With Pangea breaking apart, the stage was set for the dinosaurs to become the dominant force in the history of Earth. As the continents continued to drift, the dinosaurs adapted to the varying climates of each new landmass. Some evolved into massive, long-necked giants, grazing on the lush plants that flourished in the temperate regions. Others evolved into ferocious predators, dominating their territories with speed and strength. And while the mammals were evolving in the shadows, the dinosaurs were taking center stage, filling every ecological niche and dominating every corner of the Earth. In the skies, the first true birds began to emerge, adapting to life in the air. These early birds were small, swift creatures, capable of darting between trees and hunting for insects. The skies, once ruled by pterosaurs, were now being populated by the ancestors of the birds we know today. This new branch of life was beginning to carve out a niche in the evolving world of Pangea. But not all the changes were about evolution and survival. The breaking of Pangea also had a profound impact on the climate. As the continents drifted apart, the Earth's atmosphere began to change. The large, connected landmass of Pangea had allowed heat and moisture to circulate freely across the planet, creating a more uniform climate. But now, as the continents drifted apart, the climate of each landmass began to evolve independently. Some regions became hotter and drier, while others became cooler and wetter. This shift in climate played a major role in shaping the evolution of life on each continent, as animals and plants adapted to the changing conditions. The breakup of Pangea also had a significant impact on the oceans. As the land masses separated, the once massive ocean that had surrounded the supercontinent, Panthalassa, began to break into separate seas. These isolated bodies of water became breeding grounds for new species of marine life, and the ocean currents began to shift, creating new ecosystems. The oceans were now divided by the land masses, but they were also filled with new and diverse life, giving rise to the marine ecosystems that would eventually shape the world's oceans. As you continue to walk across this changing world, you realize that Pangea's breakup didn't just separate continents, it separated life. The creatures that once shared a common environment were now being forced to adapt to new conditions, and in doing so, they gave rise to entirely new species. The evolution of life during this time was unlike anything the planet had ever seen, and it set the stage for the incredible diversity of life that would eventually populate Earth. Pangea's breakup wasn't just a geological event, it was an evolutionary one. The forces of nature that caused the continents to drift apart also created new opportunities for life to evolve, adapt, and diversify. And as the land masses separated and the oceans changed, so too did the world of life that lived within them. The breakup of Pangea set the stage for the rise of dinosaurs, the flourishing of new plant species, and the eventual rise of mammals. It was a time of transformation, a time when life was reshaping itself in ways that were just beginning to be understood. The story of Pangea, as breakup, is the story of Earth, as future, a future that would see the world forever changed. As the continents continue to drift apart and Earth's landscapes shift, life itself begins to take on new forms. You can almost sense the pulse of evolution unfolding before you as species evolve, adapt, and diversify in response to the new and unique environments each continent presents. What was once a singular, unified world of interconnected ecosystems is now a world of isolation, one where species, once part of the same larger family, are now undergoing their own evolutionary paths. Let's focus on the dinosaurs, the true rulers of this new world. Their dominance, which had only begun to take shape in the days of Pangea, was now starting to spread across the newly formed continents. On each landmass, from what would become North America to the distant lands of the southern continents, the dinosaur kingdom flourished. With the continents now separated by oceans and mountains, the conditions for these creatures to evolve became as diverse as the land masses themselves. Picture a lush, humid forest in what will soon be South America, where the early herbivores, like the Plateosaurus, are thriving. These dinosaurs, relatively small by later standards, are the pioneers of their world, testing the limits of what's possible in the changing climates. The new ecosystems offer abundant resources for the herbivores to consume, and the land is dotted with ferns, cycads, and conifers, plants that have adapted to the varying climates of the shifting continents. And as the herbivores grow larger and evolve, so too do their predators, like the agile and quick Coelophysis, which begins to thrive in the drier regions, preying upon the smaller, slower dinosaurs that can't keep up. Meanwhile, across the now separated land masses, a different world is emerging. In the northern continents, cooler climates and new ecosystems encourage the rise of different forms of life. The herbivorous dinosaurs of this region, like the massive Triceratops and Stegosaurus, are evolving into formidable giants, protected by bony frills or thick armor plates to defend against the growing number of predators in the area. These herbivores are being joined by an increasing variety of smaller dinosaurs, whose role in the food chain begins to shift as new species evolve with distinct adaptations to the cold and dry climates of their new continents. This ongoing separation of continents has given rise to dramatic diversification in the dinosaur kingdom, Creatures that once shared a common ancestor are now becoming increasingly different, separated by vast oceans, mountain ranges, and deserts. The pace of evolution is accelerating. Isolated from one another, these creatures have adapted to their new environments in ways that would have been impossible on the original, connected landmass of Pangea. In this new world, life is finding its own paths, and it is those paths, shaped by geography, climate, and isolation, that will define the future of the planet. While the dinosaurs dominate the land, marine life is undergoing its own dramatic shift. As the continents break apart, the oceans between them become breeding grounds for marine reptiles and sea creatures that had never been seen before. The ichthyosaurs, with their sleek, fish-like bodies, begin to spread into the newly formed seas. These creatures are among the first true marine reptiles, and they have adapted to the separated seas with incredible agility and speed. Plesiosaurs, with their long necks and massive bodies, begin to take control of the deeper, colder waters, while other marine reptiles thrive in the warmer, shallow coastal regions. The breakup of Pangea didn't just bring about the rise of land-dwelling dinosaurs. It also set the stage for the diversification of marine life. Marine ecosystems, once linked by the vast ocean of Panthalassa, are now separated into different seas. The new barriers between continents lead to new evolutionary pressures in the oceans. Species of fish, sea creatures, and marine reptiles adapt to the increasingly distinct environments in each sea. With the separation of the oceans, life in the seas becomes just as diverse as life on land, creating a complex web of interdependent species that will thrive for millions of years. And even within the atmosphere, life is evolving. The first birds, descended from small theropod dinosaurs, begin to evolve the ability to fly. Their ancestors, once small, ground-dwelling creatures, are now soaring through the skies, adapting to new niches. In this world of constantly shifting landscapes, these early birds are gaining new advantages. As the continents shift, the air above them begins to offer new possibilities. The birds are beginning to carve out their own ecological niche, hunting insects and small animals, while the skies are becoming home to yet another group of creatures that will continue to evolve in surprising ways. As the world changes around them, the forces of life on Earth are beginning to take shape in ways that will eventually lead to the rise of completely new forms of life. While the dinosaurs are ruling the land, the marine reptiles are dominating the seas, and the early birds are taking to the skies. Another group is quietly evolving in the background: the mammals. The early mammals, small and unassuming, are still living in the shadows of the dinosaurs. But with the rise of new ecosystems, the mammals will soon begin their own evolutionary journey. But for now, it's the dinosaurs that dominate the story. Their size, their strength, and their ability to adapt to the new, isolated environments of the continents give them an unparalleled advantage. The rising heat from volcanic activity and the fragmentation of Pangea's once stable ecosystem have created conditions where dinosaurs can evolve into larger and more diverse forms. The ecosystems they inhabit are vast and varied, creating room for new, specialized species to evolve. As the continents drift farther apart, the climate continues to shift, creating new pressures and opportunities for life. The vast deserts, once part of Pangea's interior, are now being replaced by new ecosystems. more temperate forests, grasslands, and coastal plains. The once unified landmass has now become a patchwork of different environments, each one shaping life in new and unexpected ways. And as the continents continue their slow drift, the stage is being set for a world filled with new and diverse life forms, species that would go on to define the course of Earth's history. As the continents drift further apart, the changes on Earth continue to unfold in dramatic, almost unimaginable ways. With each passing million years, the landscape becomes more fragmented, isolated, and distinct. Life that once shared a common origin, from the towering sauropods to the early mammals creeping in the shadows, is now evolving along separate paths. The once vast and unified supercontinent is now a broken world, each new continent evolving at its own pace, creating isolated ecosystems where evolution would write entirely different stories. Let us take a moment to think about these changes. Picture the once continuous forests of Pangea now breaking apart into isolated, small patches, some of them becoming jungles, others arid deserts, and some lush coastal wetlands. As the continents continue to shift, the world of the dinosaurs begins to look increasingly different. Some dinosaurs, isolated in the northern regions, now face harsher, colder climates, while others in the southern landmasses are growing in size, adapting to a more temperate environment. The world has splintered into separate worlds, where creatures must evolve in isolation. It is in these isolated environments that the dinosaurs are beginning to evolve into their iconic forms. In the northern continents, cold-blooded reptiles must evolve mechanisms to survive harsher conditions. Some of them, like the Triceratops and Stegosaurus, develop thick armor and bony frills to protect them from predators, while others evolve to be faster, with sharper teeth and more efficient hunting strategies. As the ecosystems grow more complex, so do the creatures that inhabit them. On other continents, like what would later become South America, giant herbivores, such as the Brachiosaurus and Apatosaurus, grow larger to adapt to the plentiful plant life and limited predators in their new environments. Meanwhile, the seas are not immune to change either. With the oceans now separated by new land masses, marine life is evolving independently in each of these now divided waters. The great marine reptiles, like ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, evolve in isolation, adapting to different seas and feeding on the varied marine life that evolves alongside them. The once coherent marine ecosystem of Panthalassa, the superocean, is now segmented into distinct bodies of water, each with its own set of pressures and opportunities for marine life to evolve. But the real innovation, and perhaps the most surprising adaptation, comes from the air. As dinosaurs dominate the land and marine reptiles rule the seas, the first true flying creatures, ancestors of modern birds, begin to take flight. They are small at first, their wings almost fragile compared to their later, much larger descendants, but their ability to soar through the air marks a massive leap in evolution. These early flying reptiles, like the pterosaurs, take to the skies, preying on insects and small animals, opening up new niches in the food chain. The skies once dominated by the winged dinosaurs of the late Triassic are now filled with the first birds, agile and fast. They are not the massive creatures that would rule the air later, but their evolution sets the stage for the rise of a new type of life. But as much as life is flourishing and evolving in all its various forms, the Earth's climate continues to change in response to the shifting continents. As the land masses separate, the geography of the planet becomes increasingly fragmented. The once steady flow of ocean currents is now disrupted, and new patterns of wind and weather begin to shape the world in unique ways. In the southern regions of the Earth, a cooling climate sets in. The polar regions become colder, and glaciation begins to take hold in parts of the world. In the north, temperatures begin to drop as the continents drift toward more temperate zones. The changing climate leads to the rise of new types of vegetation, more suited to cooler, drier conditions. These environmental pressures shape the way life adapts to the new world, creating a planet that's increasingly divided, not just by oceans and mountains, but by vastly different ecosystems that evolve in response to the new, isolated continents. Even with the emerging isolation, life continues to thrive and diversify. In isolated pockets, certain species become adapted to very specific niches. For example, small nocturnal mammals that had been quietly living in the shadows of the dinosaurs are now finding new opportunities. As some of the larger dinosaurs fade into the background, these mammals begin to evolve, becoming more complex and specialized. In the shadows of the mighty dinosaurs, early mammals like Repenomamus begin to grow, filling new niches in the ecosystem and eventually becoming the ancestors of the mammals we know today. They may have started small, but they were already laying the groundwork for their future dominance, which would not fully manifest until the age of dinosaurs came to an end. The shifting continents and climates don't just create evolutionary opportunities for the mammals. They also pave the way for new species of amphibians, reptiles, and eventually birds. As the land masses separate, some species are left to adapt to new environments. A few species will even go extinct due to their inability to adapt to the changing climates and ecosystems. But those that survive will give rise to the creatures that will rule the Earth in the coming millennia. In fact, the geological forces at work are more than just shaping the land. They are guiding the course of evolution. The rising mountains and expanding oceans create natural barriers, forcing creatures to evolve in isolation, while some species, like the massive sauropods, dominate the land. Others are forced to adapt and evolve into entirely new forms. These new forms of life, shaped by the fragmented continents and changing climates, will set the stage for the next great evolutionary leap in Earth's history. The land is still changing, still moving, still shifting, but with every tectonic movement and volcanic eruption, the world is becoming more diverse. The rise of dinosaurs, mammals, and birds, all adapting to their environments, is just the beginning. The forces of evolution that were unleashed by the breakup of Pangea would eventually lead to the complex, interconnected ecosystems we know today. And while Pangea may be gone, its legacy is alive in the world that has emerged from its ashes. As the land masses continue to drift, the world begins to feel less like one massive supercontinent and more like the fragmented planet we know today. The process that began with the breakup of Pangea has set in motion an evolutionary experiment of unimaginable scale. The tectonic movements, volcanic eruptions, and climatic shifts are creating new environments for life to adapt to, and the isolated continents now represent entirely different worlds. You can almost feel the tension in the air as Earth's ecosystems evolve at an accelerated pace. Take a deep breath and imagine standing on a high ridge overlooking a vast, sprawling land. The horizon stretches endlessly, broken only by the occasional mountain range that rises like jagged teeth against the sky. The climate here, temperate and cool, is vastly different from the tropical world of Pangea, but life is thriving nonetheless. The continents have separated, creating vast, untapped territories for life to colonize. The animals here have adapted to the conditions of their new environment. The massive herbivores are becoming even larger, their long necks reaching high into the trees, while carnivores, like the early Allosaurus, stalk the land, hunting in the dense underbrush. Meanwhile, in other regions of the Earth, the dramatic shifts in climate are having a different effect. Some areas are becoming arid deserts, while others, once temperate, are growing colder as the continents move toward their current positions. This creates isolated pockets of life, each adapting to its own particular climate. The dinosaurs that once roamed the unified Pangea are now spread across these continents, evolving independently into distinct groups. In the colder climates, life is adapting in ways we might not expect. Species that were once adapted to warm, humid environments are learning how to survive in increasingly cooler temperatures. The early mammals, small and inconspicuous, are adapting to the changing world, learning to become more efficient hunters, and gaining traits that will make them the dominant life form on Earth once the dinosaurs fade into extinction. The early mammals are becoming more specialized in their abilities, evolving complex behaviors that will allow them to survive in these shifting ecosystems. The breakup of Pangea also dramatically affects the ocean currents, creating new barriers between marine life. Once united in a vast ocean, the marine creatures of Pangea are now separated by land masses, each region's marine life adapting to its unique environmental pressures. The vast seas that once connected everything are now oceans unto themselves, each evolving different ecosystems. New marine reptiles, like mosasaurs and tylosaurs, begin to thrive, their once solitary ancestors now emerging into the distinct seas that have formed between the drifting continents. On land, life is becoming more diverse and specialized as each continent develops its own unique climate. In the southern hemisphere, what will eventually become Antarctica is beginning to cool dramatically, transforming into a colder, more barren region. This will leave certain species trapped in isolated environments, forcing them to evolve in ways they never could have. In the more connected world of Pangea, the flora and fauna of these newly emerging cold regions will go on to adapt to new environmental challenges, leading to unique evolutionary developments in the future. In the meantime, the Earth is still active, with volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and climate shifts shaping the land in real time. The continents are still moving, pushing each other in different directions. As the land masses shift further apart, the atmospheric conditions also change. Volcanic activity continues to release gases into the atmosphere, altering the climate once more. This creates cycles of warming and cooling, which in turn drive evolutionary changes across the planet. Life, ever resilient, adapts to these new conditions, creating entirely new ecosystems that are unlike anything before. The effect of this breakup goes beyond the simple division of land masses. It reshapes the entire planet's ecological system. The land and the seas are no longer one interconnected web of life. Instead, they are a mosaic of isolated, evolving ecosystems. Each environment becomes its own world, with unique species, plants, and geological features. As the landmasses drift toward their final positions, the creatures that once lived together in a unified Pangea are now separated by oceans, mountain ranges, and deserts. These barriers provide the isolation needed for speciation, the evolution of distinct species in different regions. With every seismic shift, Earth's species are becoming increasingly specialized. The diversity of life, though once limited to a single landmass, is now blossoming into a wide variety of forms. The dinosaurs are evolving into numerous species, each adapted to its unique environment, from the dense jungles to the arid deserts to the polar regions. The creatures that roam Earth now, from the towering herbivores to the swift, predatory carnivores, are proof of the remarkable adaptability of life. At the same time, the Earth's atmosphere continues to evolve. The increased volcanic activity, the rise of new land masses, and the shifting oceans all contribute to a new balance of gases in the air. This altered atmosphere is not just changing the climate, it's creating the conditions for the next phase of life to emerge. The planet is on the brink of a new era, one in which the Earth will continue to evolve, creating the conditions for the next great chapter of life's history. Looking at the Earth now, you realize that the world is not just a place where life survives. It's a place where life adapts, evolves, and thrives in the most unexpected ways. The breakup of Pangea was not just an event, it was the catalyst for the evolution of life as we know it. And as the continents continue to drift apart, the world is transforming into a vibrant, diverse planet that will continue to evolve for millions of years. With the separation of Pangea, Earth has entered a new phase where the forces of evolution are being shaped by geography, climate, and isolation. The rise of dinosaurs, the adaptation of early mammals, the evolution of marine life, it's all happening right in front of your eyes. The world is changing, life is evolving, and the legacy of Pangea, though broken apart, continues to shape the Earth in ways we can only begin to understand. It's a world of constant transformation, and this is just the beginning of what Earth has in store. As you watch the continents drift further apart, the landscape of Earth continues to evolve in dramatic ways. The movement of these land masses, while slow, is profound. Over millions of years, entire ecosystems are transforming, and the creatures that inhabit them are doing the same. Life, ever adaptable, begins to carve out niches in new environments that could have been unimaginable just a few million years before. The planet now feels like a puzzle, its pieces scattered, each evolving independently, with barriers between them, creating isolated worlds. The oceans that separate the continents are full of life that has evolved in unique ways, while the land masses themselves are becoming increasingly distinct from one another. No longer are the climates, ecosystems, or inhabitants of each continent the same. What was once a unified world is now an intricate web of biodiversity, with each piece developing its own specialized set of creatures and plant life. The new geography created by the breakup of Pangea has in many ways become the stage for a new kind of evolution. Life is evolving along separate paths, isolated by oceans, mountain ranges, and vast deserts. These new environments are producing an explosion of diversity, each region creating unique life forms. While some species thrive in the cooler, temperate zones, others are adapting to hotter, drier conditions. The creatures of the world are now answering to the call of isolation, evolving into distinct species suited to their new, fragmented homes. In this era of separation, you can see the beginning of something truly remarkable: the rise of the dinosaurs to dominance. As the continents continue to move, species that were once confined to certain regions are now developing into new forms, filling every niche on the planet. Some dinosaurs, isolated in the warmer climates of the southern continents, grow to immense sizes, becoming the towering giants that will later dominate the Earth. Others, living in more temperate climates, evolve into swift, agile predators, adapting to the changing world around them. The process of speciation, which has already begun, continues in full force. As the land masses are further divided, species once connected are forced into new environments, and this isolation sparks the development of entirely new species. The landscapes that were once uniform are now fragmented, offering different habitats and climates to creatures that evolve independently. Where there were once vast, unified ecosystems, there are now isolated pockets of life, each developing along its own evolutionary path. The oceans, too, are changing, with new currents and seas emerging between the continents. The marine life that once swam freely across the unified waters of Pangea is now separated by oceans. But in this separation, new marine ecosystems begin to form, each with its own set of challenges and opportunities for the creatures that inhabit them. Marine reptiles, like ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, thrive in these new, isolated seas, evolving to meet the demands of different aquatic environments. The seas are becoming just as diverse as the land, and the creatures that inhabit them are following the same pattern of adaptation and diversification that is happening on land. As the continents continue to drift, the world is undergoing a process of transformation that is shaping the future of Earth. The rise of the dinosaurs, the evolution of marine reptiles, and the diversification of life on land are all part of this grand experiment. The planet is being divided into distinct ecological regions, each with its own set of pressures and opportunities for life to thrive. The process of speciation is accelerating, with life forms evolving in ways that are as unique as the environments they inhabit. The land masses themselves are not merely shifting, they are shaping the climate and environment in dramatic ways. As the continents continue their slow journey, new mountain ranges are forming, altering the patterns of rainfall and temperature. These mountains create barriers that further isolate species, creating new opportunities for evolution. As the climate changes, ecosystems are forced to adapt, and life is molded by the new environmental conditions. The cooling of the earth, along with the formation of new landforms, is creating an entirely new world. A world where the forces of natural selection are driving the evolution of species in unprecedented ways. But this process is not without its challenges. The separation of Pangea and the shifting of the continents has not only created new environments, but has also led to mass extinctions. The changing climate, along with the rise of new species, has made survival difficult for some creatures. As the Earth's atmosphere continues to evolve, The pressure on species to adapt increases. Those that can't keep up with the changing world are left behind, while others evolve and thrive. It's a world of constant transformation, where the struggle for survival is just as real for the dinosaurs as it is for the early mammals and marine life. As you stand in this world of change, you realize that this is the true power of evolution, the ability of life to adapt to the changing environment, to evolve and diversify in response to the challenges presented by a shifting planet. The breakup of Pangea, while separating the continents, also opened the door to a new era of life on Earth. The species that evolved during this time will go on to shape the course of Earth's history, creating the biodiversity that will define our planet for millions of years. In this world of separation and isolation, life is finding new ways to thrive. The rise of dinosaurs, the spread of mammals, the evolution of marine life, all are part of the same grand story. The breakup of Pangea is not just a geological event, it's a pivotal moment in the history of life on Earth, setting the stage for the creatures and ecosystems that will eventually dominate the planet. The breakup of Pangea didn't just change the Earth's geography, it changed the very course of evolution, creating the conditions for life to diversify and adapt in ways that were once unimaginable. As the continents drifted apart, so too did life, and in that separation, Earth's ecosystems began to take on their current, familiar forms. The story of Earth's evolution is far from over, and the legacy of Pangea's breakup continues to echo throughout the planet. As the Earth continues to shift and the continents take on their new, isolated forms, the world begins to look less and less like the Pangea of old. The separation of the supercontinent marks a turning point in the story of life on Earth, a pivotal moment where the evolutionary paths of species began to splinter and diversify in ways that had never occurred before. The breakup of Pangea, though gradual, would eventually give rise to the incredible variety of ecosystems that we see today, creating the foundation for the planet's biodiversity. The legacy of this ancient supercontinent, though broken apart, continues to shape the world in profound ways. Now that the continents are largely separated, each one has its own set of unique challenges and opportunities. The world has splintered into distinct environments, some more temperate and cooler, others increasingly arid or tropical, creating new habitats for the creatures that inhabit them. Species that were once connected by vast stretches of land are now isolated in different corners of the world, creating a natural laboratory for evolution to experiment with the forces of life. On some continents, like the one that will become North America, large herbivores and predators evolve in response to the changing climate. The once warm, tropical conditions are giving way to more seasonal climates. The great, towering sauropods are now restricted to smaller, more isolated pockets of land, evolving into new, often more specialized forms. Meanwhile, the smaller theropod dinosaurs continue to thrive, evolving into larger, more efficient predators. Some of these species, like the Tyrannosaurus rex, will eventually dominate the landscape, filling the ecological niches left behind by the now dominant plant eaters. On other continents, such as South America, the environment is becoming increasingly arid. The vast deserts that emerge offer new challenges for the dinosaurs living there. Some species adapt to these harsh conditions, evolving into smaller, more agile creatures that can thrive in the heat. Meanwhile, in the lush, isolated coastal regions, life continues to flourish, with different species of marine reptiles adapting to the evolving seas. As the continents become more independent, so do the evolutionary paths of the species that inhabit them. The separation of the land masses creates barriers, and these barriers are crucial in the process of speciation. As each continent becomes isolated, the once shared ancestors of creatures like dinosaurs and reptiles begin to evolve in different directions. The large towering sauropods of one continent may evolve into smaller, more specialized plant eaters on another. Meanwhile, predators that once roamed freely across Pangea must now adapt to their new environments, hunting smaller prey or evolving into the terrifying apex predators we recognize today. But it's not just the dinosaurs that are evolving. The mammals, which had long lived in the shadows of the mighty reptiles, are beginning to adapt in their own ways. With the dinosaurs filling the larger roles in the ecosystem, early mammals take on more specialized, nocturnal lifestyles. They begin to evolve traits that will allow them to survive in the shadows. Larger brains, heightened senses, and a greater ability to adapt to the changing environments. These mammals are small, but their evolutionary potential is immense. They are laying the foundation for the future of life on Earth, preparing to one day take over the ecosystems left behind by the dinosaurs. The oceans, now separated by new landmasses, are also undergoing dramatic changes, with new, fragmented seas forming between the drifting continents. Marine reptiles begin to diversify and adapt to the unique conditions of each sea. The marine ecosystems that once spanned a unified super ocean are now isolated, creating new opportunities for marine life to evolve. Some species, like the Ichthyosaurus and Plesiosaurus, continue to thrive in the warmer, shallow seas, while others adapt to colder, deeper waters, evolving in ways that will eventually give rise to the modern marine life we know today. The breakup of Pangea has, in many ways, set the stage for the Earth we know today. The continents have drifted to their current positions, and as they did, they created the conditions for new and unique ecosystems to emerge. The climate, geography, and isolation of the continents created environments where life could evolve in ways that were once unimaginable. The species that evolved during this time are the ancestors of the diverse life forms that populate our planet today, from the dinosaurs that once ruled the land to the mammals that would one day dominate the Earth. And so, as you look at the planet now, you realize that the story of Pangea's breakup is far from over. It is the beginning of the world we know today, the story of life's resilience, adaptability, and evolution. The land that was once one giant supercontinent is now a patchwork of separate continents, each with its own ecosystems, each with its own story. The species that once roamed freely across Pangea are now isolated, evolving in different ways, but their legacy is still alive in the creatures we see today. The breakup of Pangea was not the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that continues to unfold as Earth's life forms adapt to the ever-changing world around them. Pangea may be gone, but its legacy lives on. The forces that shaped the breakup of this supercontinent are the same forces that continue to shape the world today. The mountains that rise from the earth, the oceans that divide the continents, and the creatures that call this planet home are all part of the ongoing story of Earth's evolution. The world may be different from the one Pangea once knew, but in many ways it is still the same, a world where life is always adapting, always evolving, and always finding new ways to thrive. And in the end, as the continents continue their drift, the story of Earth's evolution is still being written, from the breakup of Pangea to the rise of the dinosaurs, the mammals, and beyond. The planet continues to change, to grow, and to shape the life that inhabits it. And just as Pangea set the stage for the world we know today, the changes to come will continue to shape the Earth for millions of years to come.